Incurable, Jules. I just wanted to come on here and kind of talk about tubes this time. So let's get into tubes. What are the different types of feeding tubes? What are their functions? How many of the types that have I had? How long have I had the different types? Kind of what was it like with the feeding tubes? How is it like living with the feeding tube I have right now? So let's get into it. So there are a few different types of feeding tubes. There are NJ, NG, G tubes, J tubes, and GJ tubes. And there's a few variations of those tubes, like there are buttons and then there are danglers like the one I have, but we can get into that a little bit later. So let's focus on what that means. So I just listed a bunch of acronyms to you and you're probably like, what in the world do those mean? Alright, so I'll explain it to you. Okay, let's first break it down into G and J. So G tubes are gastric tubes and they go into the stomach. And they're usually used for venting or draining, to let out gas, to drain food out, to just kind of help stomach move and do processes that it can't do on its own when symptoms are bad. And then J tube is usually used for feeding. I use it to run my feeding through, and I run that pretty much all day, every day. So I run it 24 hours and I run it at a fixed feed rate. And so then what does the N stand for? So the N stands for nasal. So anything with an N in front of it, NJ and G are both nasal tubes. G again stands for gastric, so an NG tube is going to be a nasal tube that goes into your stomach. And an NJ tube is going to be a nasal tube that goes into your upper intestines. I have actually had an NJ tube that goes into my upper intestines, and I'm going to throw a photo in there and talk a little bit about that. So here we go, there's that. So I'm going to quick talk a little bit about how I got my NJ tube. So how they do it is they don't sedate you for the NJ tube usually. At least for me they didn't. They usually put it through your nose and you swallow it down. And they numb your throat a little bit first, and you're supposed to swallow it down. And then once it gets into your stomach, he pushes it through your pylorus muscle that I talked about in the other video, and it goes into your upper intestines. They had to give me some Reglan because I was pretty anxious, so that pylorus muscle was kind of tight. But in the end, they were able to get it in. And I had my NJ tube only for a total of 3 days, so it wasn't too bad, but it definitely was not the most comfortable, and my throat did get sore. Some people have NJ tubes for quite a lot longer, but I only had mine for 3 days. Just to test out to make sure that my intestines could handle the formula and the feeding. Now back to NJ tubes. So, as we talked about NJ tubes and NG tubes, now we can talk about surgical tubes. So there are a few different types of surgical tubes. There are G tubes that just straight go into your stomach, and those are mostly used for venting. And I don't know a whole lot of people who just have straight G tubes only, but there are that out there, and those I know a lot of are for young babies who have trouble swallowing things and things like that, or people who have esophageal issues but their stomach works fine. For me, my stomach does not work fine, so a G tube would just not work for me. So that's why we have the J tube for people whose stomach does not work right, and they have to go through their upper intestines in order for their food to be digested and for them to get nutrients. So for me, that's how I get my nutrients, is through a J tube. And now that is also surgical. So there can be just a straight J tube. I have a GJ tube, which means I have a tube going into my stomach, and I also have a tube going into my intestines. Those are the most common types of tubes, because then for me, if I ate anything that was upsetting my stomach, I could drain it out and prevent a lot of symptoms and things like that. And for people who get really bad bloating, they can release a lot of gas and air and stuff from their stomach to just kind of help alleviate a lot of symptoms. and then the J tube is where I do my feeding. So that's kind of how it is, and then that's kind of about tubes. So let's get into the surgery. Now, the surgery process for it, you are put under, and it is a surgery, and they do cut a hole into you. So it's not, it was to be straight up with you, it was a terrible surgery, and most people you will ask that have GJ tubes or any sort of surgical tubes will tell you it's a pretty rough surgery. It's just very hard on your body. It's just a new thing in your body. Your body's adjusting to it. It's been carved a hole into it. A path has been formed. It's just a whole lot, and I never do well under anesthesia. Also, I think a mix of the anesthesia meds upset my stomach as well, so it was just not good. I was also very malnourished at the time, so recovery was also really hard for me because the surgery was even harder on my body because I was so malnourished. So it was just a conglomeration of a bunch of different stuff that just led to it being a really, really tough time. And it took me about a month to fully recover, and let me tell you, that month was hell. And it was living hell. I mean, I wasn't tolerating my tube feeds, so as soon as I got my surgery, I think I stayed like a week in the hospital, and they did the whole process so fast. They were trying to get the tube feeds running, go, 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 and they just sent me home running the tube feeds at a really high rate, and it was going in and coming straight out. Like, if you catch my drift, like, I don't want to get into details. It was just not a fun time, and it was just a lot for my body, and I was very weak. I was in a lot of pain. I wasn't sleeping very well. It was very, very hard. And I finally got back to see my doctor, and the doctor immediately admits me into the hospital after seeing me because I had lost a pound even after my tube feed surgery, which was supposed to be the cure-all, like that was supposed to get me back to my weight, and it wasn't working. So they had to change my formula, put me on TPN, and I was in the hospital for another 5 days. It was a lot, and over the course, like those 2 months were just a lot, and I was very sick during that time, but I was able to push through, and that TPN really saved my life. It really, as soon as they switched the formula and got me on TPN, my tube feeds started working really well. I started tolerating them. I was suddenly feeling a lot better. I had a lot more energy. I was feeling like my old self again. It was really great. Like, thank goodness for TPN. And then, and I can talk more about TPN in another video, but I think that's where I'm going to stop it today. I feel like I've talked a lot about tubes, and so thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so bye. Oh, and stay strong.